Welcome to the Sustainable Clinical Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Sarah Smith. I am a practicing rural family physician and the charting coach. This is the podcast for physicians and advanced practice providers who are ready to step back from the busyness of their clinical day to share ideas, question everything, and redesign their clinical day. We are redesigning clinical medicine to create sustainable clinical days and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Join us for discussions with world experts who are helping design sustainable models of clinical medicine and the physicians or clinicians who have discovered or designed sustainable models of clinical medicine for themselves. Hi, and welcome back, everybody. I would love to introduce you to our guest today, Dr. Rashmi Schramm. So Dr. Schramm has been a guest coach inside the Charting Champions program, and I brought her in specifically because she helps us with that intentional relaxation. Especially, we did this yoga nidra with Dr. Schramm inside the program. And if one of my members is having a bad week or a bad day, or just seems to be within that distress of physical exhaustion, mental exhaustion, just in a bad place, we say, just go back to the recordings, go listen to Dr. Rashmi Schramm, like just immediately, just go put that on. And one of the terms that I learned from Dr. Schramm, which I had not ever heard before, was supremely comfortable. Like, we did this yoga nidra session together, and she said, I want you to make sure you tell your members when they come to this that they need to be in a place where they can get supremely comfortable, but not fall asleep. And I'm like, what? And I mean, pillows under every part of you that needs pillowing and big fluffy blankets. I'm like, wow, I love this term. Just listening to supremely comfortable made me immediately feel more relaxed. And so with that in mind, I bring to you Dr. Rashmi Schramm. Welcome.
It's so good to be here. I can't stop grinning from ear to ear. I love that story of how just something simple like get yourself supremely comfortable can disarm us from whatever mind drama might be going on. I love that story.
It's totally like, if I'm having a bad day and like if I'm in emergency department and we're doing like this big, long overnight call and we finally get 5 minutes to go down to the call room to get into this very squeaky, uncomfortable, hard mattress with flat pillows that have that plastic lining on them. And so I'm like, supremely comfortable required. And I go grab my like pillow and my fluffy blanket from the little cubby that's in that room, and I put it on. I'm like, I am now, and I remind myself, closer to supremely comfortable.
Even for if it's just the next 4.5 minutes.
Right.
Brilliant.
Like anything to just add to the experience of how can I make this more comfortable? How can I make this more relaxing so that even if it's only for 5 minutes, I can have that little bit more comfortable thoughtfulness towards myself. So thank you for that. So tell us about you. So where are you in the world? What do you do?
I am in Northeast Florida, so I actually am a board certified family physician, and I right now, over the last couple of years or so, have really been focusing a lot on the meditation that you just talked about and teaching meditation as well as coaching. I do group programs, I do one-on-one coaching, and so that's really where I'm spending most of my time right now, and it's been really, really rewarding. The name of my program is called The Power Within, and it connotes kind of what we're always trying to do, which is to tap into that power within so that we can then harness more energy and harness more intentional action to get to that fulfilling place that we're always trying to get to.
Yeah. So family physicians, so this is very topical because family physicians are feeling really under the pressure right now. I don't think any physician is without that pressure, but I absolutely understand from my family physician colleagues what's going on in their world. So tell us about you. Were you always so good at intentional relaxation and looking after yourself?
No, Absolutely not. I know the short answer is no. I'll tell you the story of how I became, sort of obsessed with and involved in what I do now. But, I was an attending when I was, in my early 30s, and I had 2 young kids right away. My husband is also a physician, and he was working a lot, and I was working a lot. And it was kind of this perfect amalgam, as it is for so many women and men in medicine right now, of just overworked, overburdened, not understanding tools that can actually help us to heal our own selves, not understanding anything about self-care. I had never heard the term self-care literally until I was probably, in my late 30s. And so really that was a good setup for me, not just ignoring myself, but also sort of like throwing myself under the bus. And what that looked like was working, probably 14, 15 hours, always charting at night. I mean, I remember coming home at like 6:30, relieving, whoever was taking care of the kids, doing kid stuff. And I know this is the life for so many people. And I know you are there to help them extricate themselves from that life that I lived for a little over a decade, where then I would log on at like 9 p.m. and then chart until midnight. And then, I don't know, get the tiniest amount of sleep and start that cycle all over again. And it was like that for many years. And I was ignoring the fact that I was not mentally feeling very well. I was not emotionally feeling well. It looked like me over exercising or overdoing so many different things because I wasn't tolerating any of my own emotions. And it also then looked like me being very irritable all the time, and then kind of lashing out at my own self because I was irritable. So that cycle continued. And I really waited until I got physically sick to say, okay, something must be done. And so I had so many random ailments that, I just found a CT scan from when I had worked literally all day. I guess I was passing kidney stones in the office with tears in my eyes. And then at some point sort of like passed out. And so my manager like drove me to the ER. And I found the little CT scan when I was looking for something where I had all these obstructive. So, and I had GI issues, I had chronic daily migraines. And that's when it really began to be very apparent that what I was doing was not sustainable. And so I had exposure to meditation. Even as a child, I grew up in India in a very large family that, practiced yoga all the time. And then I was a secret meditator in college. I was a closet meditator. Wouldn't let anyone know because I was trying to get into med school. And so I was like, let me just try. Let me just see what I can do. And so that's how I sort of started to tread lightly into that. And Sarah, what happened was I would find some relief, right? Because we know that, meditation can bring us into homeostasis. Mm-hmm. And then I would forget all about it. And so I would call myself a crisis meditator now that I understand what that is, like wait until the crisis. Oh, let me use this tool and then let it go. And it wasn't until I was just like, this is so silly. Like, I understand that this works, but why I just can't sustain it. And so I actually signed up to be a teacher because part of the teacher training program, literally I had to sign and say, I will meditate every day for the next 2 years during this training. And I was like, yes, sign me up. Apparently I need this. And that's how I got into it. It wasn't really that I ever thought I was going to teach, but I needed the community. I needed the accountability, and I was desperate for that deep dive. And then that was just the first part of many trainings. I'm still in some, and that's the beauty of this, right? So I hope that helps.
I think it does. I think that you've touched on something that you'll find a lot of physicians are doing. When you said I'm overdoing, so you even mentioned I was overdoing exercise and you were still unhealthy. Like, now you made a lot of people confused, because a lot of the people that will be listening are like, but I don't get time to exercise. And she was exercising and she was still not well. Yeah.
Well, we can overdo anything and everything. We can overdo food. That's the condition of the human mind, right? So it can lead to injuries, all kinds of things.
Yeah. So I also love that I had to sign up for teaching training. And I think this comes from that obliger piece. As physicians, we'll do things for others.
Always.
We won't do them for ourselves.
Always. Always. We could pry that thing apart all day long.
Yeah. And I've heard so often here within this space that people will be either looking for an exit strategy or sign up for the certification in, rather than just kind of doing it for leisure, pleasure, for their own good. Tell us more about that. So you went looking for a teaching training. So yeah.
And this was before social media. So
Yeah.
I didn't know anyone. I didn't know how to connect with anyone. And I did know it was with, with the Chopra Center in California. So I knew that it was a hybrid program and I knew that I could do that. And that's really why I did that, because if I had found a leisure program that would feel as holding accountability, I think I would have done it. But part of being a teacher is healing yourself. I mean, that's actually the most important part of teaching anything at all, is turning inward and tolerating what's here and being okay and accepting what's here rather than somehow bypassing any of it. And so a lot of that in mindfulness and meditation, it has nothing to do with bypassing any of the things that we just talked about, right? It has to do with gently turning towards what it is that I am trying to avoid feeling. And is it really that bad? Is it really that much of a monster? And so I think if I had had the choice now, I probably would choose leisure, but in this space, and even now, the reason I continue to sign up for more of these, certification programs is it gives me the depth that I'm looking for.
Very interesting. Listening to that story, I remember I was working in a small country town. We had a lot of very sick kids come in and a lot of kids with seizure disorders in the community. When I was in my very first internship, the neurologist I was working with, very lovely, like put you under his wing, kind of teach you anything you needed to know kind of guy. Didn't mind if getting called in the middle of the night by you, like that kind of really protected mentorship. Said to me, if you get, freaked out by headache, seizure, whatever it is that you are internally struggling with, he's like, go see all of them. And then for sure, you'll be less stressed when you get one in the middle of the night. I'm like, oh, that's really good information. And so when we had all these sick kids, my friend and I were like, we're signing up to become instructors with the PALS program, which was the Pediatric Advanced Life Support. We're going to be instructors because it's going to teach us what we need to know. We're going to get so good at it, then we can teach others. So if we know it so well internally, we can go and teach others. So I totally get where that, I want to go do a certification in it, because it comes from that, I need to know it well enough to be able to teach. And it's going, because I have to teach it, I'm going to turn up and learn it well enough to teach it. So I think that most of us in medicine have that same, I don't want to take students because then I have to know it really well. I'm like, yeah, press into that. Like to know it well enough to teach it. And listen, we teach our patients all the time. We know it well enough to teach a student 100% of the time. So just take that confidence already. As a physician, you're good enough. Good enough. Okay. I want to go back to, you said something that it may not be immediately understood by others, tolerating my own emotions.
Right.
So when you say that, tell us what you kind of meant. So you were overdoing everything and you were unable to tolerate your own emotions. What is that looking like? So you were irritable, things weren't happening well. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think we can spend a lifetime running away from our emotions, right? And we can do it with a lot of cleverness. So what I mean by that is, what I have come to, at least the way that it occurs to me, is that life has both pain and pleasure, and that's what we're taught.
Mm-hmm.
And we somehow become conditioned to seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. And it becomes sort of like a lifelong quest for us. And so then pleasure becomes the only thing that matters. And by pleasure, I don't mean just simple pleasure, but all things that are in that category. And then pain isn't necessarily pain, but it could be fear, it could be guilt, it could be shame, it could be embarrassment, any of those things. Mm-hmm. And when we are constantly avoiding one thing and trying to move to the other, it's not sustainable. We are meant to flow through with both of those. And all of our emotions are meant to flow through us. They are not meant to be ignored, compartmentalized, all those other things. And so part of giving myself permission to sit with what is really uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable. But that's really what leads to that freedom on the other side, is that ability to withstand exactly what you just said, which is, I did all these PALS things so that if all these different kids come in, whether it's a seizure or some other life-threatening issue, I, to some degree, have already exposed myself to it, and I understand what it's, what to do, right? So it's very action oriented, but in this case, it is kind of action oriented, which is to just be with, maybe go for a walk and recognize what it is that we're feeling, recognize where we feel it in our body. And so in that case, that's really what I mean by tolerating. And it's not like it's one and done, because it's a daily practice, because our emotions are constantly telling us things. They're messengers. And our job is just to listen and allow them to pass.
Yeah. So what would a clinical day have looked like before and after learning kind of some of these tools?
Yeah, for sure. I think clinical days for me were a constant sort of, I was always the doctor that was always behind, even especially after I learned Ayurveda and yoga and meditation, because I wanted to teach my patients in the 15-minute appointments. So that really never changed. That circumstance never changed for me. I was always the doctor that was behind. But what changed for me was my approach and my acceptance of, yes, I will always be behind, and my patients understand that. I had a very small niche of patients for all those years, and they did, and they appreciated the time that I would give them. So it was a more intentional way of practicing. And I developed some practices that I found to be really helpful, which was just to ground myself with one breath and one thought, of just, really just imbuing light, imbuing compassion when I knocked on the door every single time. And it was sort of like this very quick reset, even though physically it wasn't really possible to reset. And so I developed sort of programs like that within myself. And I developed, some very quick breath work, exercises that I could do. I did have my clinical staff meditating with me, at lunch every day. So I was able to change the internal effects or the internal way that I was practicing for sure. But externally, I wouldn't say that I didn't chart until midnight. And that's because I didn't meet you, Sarah. I hadn't met you yet, because I've heard the way that you teach it and the way that you coach on it. And it's absolutely brilliant. And I needed this 15 years ago.
Yeah.
When you were in utero.
I totally understand. So what you're noticing here is that the patient load is the same, the running behind is the same, the patient problems and the patient requests in the room are the same, but Rashmi Schramm is turning up differently. You're having a different experience, and you're still having frustration, and you're still having, I'm running behind, and you're still having the internal dialogue of, is that okay? And we're still talking to ourselves about, is it okay that I'm running behind? And then we have you feeling internally completely different.
Yeah.
Right. So that is possible. So we can start that. And I agree, when I started with this process as well, nothing changed on the outside initially. It was simply the inside was not saying so many bad things. I was just seeing it from a different perspective, that stepping back and saying, it's okay to take a breath. It's okay to relax. It's okay to find the human in the room. I don't have to let them decide how I'm going to feel about my day. I don't have to be frustrated. We're hearing that a lot here. So it's that it starts inside me. Yeah. Tell us about irritability. So you were irritable. You're talking about irritability. How did that change? What happened there?
Yeah. So, in Ayurveda, if I may, there are kind of three main sort of mind-body types. They're called doshas, and most physicians end up in the kind that I am. I'm sure you are as well. It's a kind of a high pitta, which is fire. Fire and water is kind of the predominant sort of elements. And you can understand that, the minute that we go out of balance, it isn't, it can be anxiety, but a lot of times it's anger, and irritability is part of that anger cycle there. And so anytime I was out of balance, I mean, and now that's one of my red flags is irritability, right? Is when we're not processing our own emotions, when we're not giving ourselves permission to feel or rest or do anything, then we have to dump it on someone because we can only carry so much of it. And that's really what that is. And oftentimes, unfortunately, it's the people that are closest to us. I would never be irritable with a staff or with a patient, for example. It would, unfortunately, it's the people that we are around and love the most where we become irritable with. And that's really what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when we're taught to have our game face on, to go from one devastating diagnosis, bad news in one room, straight into the next room where you're talking to a completely different set of like family, kids, totally well checked, whatever, that one to the other, that denies our humanness.
It really does. It really does. And that, I think, touches on what I've just kind of been discovering a little bit within myself and with the other physicians that I work with too. And it's that the denying of the traumas that we are exposed to, just what you just said, right? And it is trauma because we do care about these people and we do love them. And we just, and it is, we just do not have the time to be able to even process any of that before we move on. And so just noticing that and saying, man, that's really challenging. That's like a really challenging thing that we're doing to ourselves every single day. Is there some way that I can find some ease at the end of the day? Is there some way that I can just be with what's there, acknowledge it because it just wants to be acknowledged?
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly it. It takes away the humanness. And we've accepted that for a really long time. And we were taught that for a really long time.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that before this practice of meditation and grounding and that acknowledgement of yourself as a human, that would translate to going home having kept all of that bottled inside, and you would notice irritability come up,
For
or
sure.
anger or anxiety, other physical expressions or verbal expressions of the things you've bottled in all day.
All the time, right? Not every day, not all the time, but often enough to where it was really bothering me that, and oftentimes it was actually directed at my own self, because that's easy to do, of just sort of self anger, self irritability. Like, I can't even believe I did that. I can't even believe I made that mistake. Of course I did. I'm a human being.
Yeah, that's what you meant by lashing out at yourself.
Yeah.
So interesting that you've taken all of this inside of you and then you've told yourself you're no good, or you've told yourself reasons why.
Oh, the stories are pretty amazing, aren't they? That we can create about situations, that we can create about ourselves. I think we call it the add-ons to what is. And it is part of the human condition. But if we have enough awareness to notice the add-ons, then we have the freedom and the power to be able to not necessarily follow it when it does show up.
Yeah. Okay. So I love this whole idea that you grew up meditating and then you got into medical school and suddenly it wasn't okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay. So I wouldn't say that I was exposed to meditation and yoga as a child. And so I don't know that I would say I meditated as a child, but I certainly it felt like home to me. Right. And so, and then in college, it was definitely in the way that it occurred to me, viewed as a weakness if I needed to meditate, for example. That was just how it occurred to me. Now, no one may have ever said that, but it was what I felt in the air. It was how I assumed that meditators were seen or yogis were seen. And so I was part of like a long running group of, yoga and meditation, kind of just, kids, if you will, all through college. But like, I would say most of my best friends never knew, right? I would just be like, I'm going to the library. And I'm sure that practice actually helped me get into medical school. And once I was in medical school, I'm not sure that I intentionally said I'm no longer going to do this. I just got swept away with medical school. And, it's easy to let a practice go when we're that busy and consumed with something. And then, of course, I was pretty far from it during residency and then as an attending, because it had been so many years.
Yeah. So what does it practically look like? Because you're still busy, you're still seeing patients, you're still having that same kind of load within the clinic, but you've fitted in meditation. You've even fitted in going and getting trained in. So what did your practice look like as you started to decide, I can't do this just when I'm in crisis? It's something I need. It's helpful to my body. So tell us, what were you experiencing about meditation yourself, and then how do you fit it in?
Yeah, I think really you teach on this and coach on this really well. And it's that we always constantly have competing priorities. There's probably not, it hasn't happened to me yet. I've never had a time in my life when I didn't have competing priorities for my time. And so ultimately we get to choose which is the higher priority. And once we make that choice, really it's a matter of honoring it. And so that's really how I approached it. And it wasn't pretty, Sarah. It wasn't like I was in some beautiful looking like tent in, in lotus posture or anything like that. Most days, I would wake up, get the kids off to school, do all the things, and then show up to work 20 minutes earlier, sit in the parking lot and meditate. I would literally during lunch, if I had a few minutes, even 5 minutes, I would go into an exam room and meditate, because if I was in my office, I would be found. So there were all kinds of things that I would say the first several years of my meditation practice were done in cars at different times. So every now and then, on the weekends, sure, I had, a soft little pillow that I could sit on where I could disconnect. But most of the time, it was not some pretty gorgeous, beautiful, top of a mountainside abode that I had when I meditated. So it was accepting that it doesn't have to look a certain way and that it doesn't have to be a certain way. And meditation in and of itself is the practice of non-judgment. And so I don't get to judge how my meditation was. That's like the exact opposite of what a meditation practice is. And so once we're able to let go and let go and let go and just create that space and honor that we created that space, and then it sticks.
Got it. Okay. And what I love about this is the messy middle, right? So what have I got available? I have a car. What do I like about the car? It's interruption free. Done.
That's it.
What else do I have available? I have available an exam room. What does it give me? Less interruptions. Go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just take a step towards what would help this become sustainable. Like, what would help me bring this into my daily practice? When you're in the car, is meditation for you where you've got something playing and you're listening along, or is it, were you doing things like without the external? How does it work? How did you get started?
Yeah, so the main kind of meditation that I practice and also teach, it's a mantra-based practice, and mantra just means mind vehicle. And so this is a practice that can be traced back to 4,000 or 5,000 years or so within the Indian Vedic tradition. It's spiritual, not religious. And in that practice, there are only two things that we need to meditate, which is to sit down and close our eyes, and then we just silently repeat that mantra. And it's said to be a quickening vehicle to take us beyond the mind. Really, that's what a nidra practice is. That's what this practice is as well, is to allow us to slip past the mind, if you will, and sort of touch our true selves. So it literally just looked like if I needed to be on a time schedule, a timer for 20 minutes or whatever, and then just sitting and closing my eyes. And, at some point, like I literally had to put like a thing that was like, I'm okay, I'm meditating. Like the thing, because people, especially because it was in a parking lot, but I learned to park a little farther away, and I learned to, all the things, because people would become concerned if you just see someone like in the morning. It's like, 6:45 in the morning. Is she all right? Does she have to, is she on drugs? Like, what does she do?
What is she doing in the car?
I'm like, I'm cool, meditating, thanks. But, then everybody knew after like the, whatever. But that's what it looked like, is just sitting down and closing our eyes.
Okay. That sounds achievable, right? Everybody.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I teach it, right? Is if, a nidra is actually the best place to start. So if you can, then that people generally enjoy getting supremely comfortable and following along. Those are things that are a great way to begin to train the mind.
I agree. I actually have directed some of my patients going through crisis or new diagnosis who hit that point where it kind of starts feeling very real for them. And I'm like, listen, go get it. It's free. Find one that you like. Podcast, YouTube channel, so many options. Supreme comfort is the idea, and it takes about half an hour to an hour.
Yeah. And it's giving ourselves permission for that 30 minutes.
Yes. I just think that it's super interesting now that I actually hadn't, within the medical training, had any of that downward grounding ideas. And you're like, how did we miss this part where we bring down our cortisol levels and our stress levels? Where did we miss thinking that that was a good idea for doctors and healthcare workers to just kind of keep this stress bottled up and keep running? Why did we think that was okay, and that we would be sustainably all right year after year within this busyness?
Yeah. And I think we're lucky in that most of us are pretty young when we go through medical training. And so we're able to withstand that and somehow figure out how to get back up day after day after day. There are so many, stories that I hear from people's training and even my own training where I realized I was away at a smaller hospital during medical school my 4th year, and it was in the winter, and they had tunnels underneath where we stayed into the hospital where I was, and it was a surgical rotation. And I think it had been 28 days since I had literally set foot outside. That's not healthy for us. And Q3 call. So it's just, that was before the 80-hour rule. But just like you said, it was not at all part of any of my medical training. I hope it is now. And that question that you asked, which is such a pivotal question, why did we think that was sustainable?
No. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's not sustainable now.
It's not sustainable. And I think we get into that zone, and we've learned so well, we've been trained so well to forget our humanness. So I come out of the hospital after a 24-hour call and walk to the car, and I get hit by that fresh air, because I'm in Canada, it's often freezing cold. Like, oh, the sky. Or even getting home and not parking like straight into the garage. Like if I'm parking outside and kind of like, oh, sunshine, this is nice.
Yeah. And how strange is that you were able to get used to that?
It's kind of like coming out of a movie theater. For those of you who are not in the practice of doing long haul and shift work, it's similar kind of de-zoning. I guess you come out and just have that disorientation of, oh, there's an outside world.
Yeah. And to me, 24-hour call is just completely inhumane. I know that you're in a rural area and you're helping so many people, but it just is not humanly, it's not kind.
No, it's not kind. That is a great phrase. Not kind. All right. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so my website is really simple. It's just my name. It's RASHMISCHRAMM.com. I have actually several free meditations that are evidence-based on my YouTube channel. So if you just go and type in Dr. Rashmi Schramm, you'll find me there. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not very active there, but I would love to connect in any of those platforms if people would like.
That sounds amazing. So for those people who are right where you were to begin with, they're overdoing and they're feeling that irritability, anger, anxiety. They're not understanding what's going wrong, or they now have some inkling that this is not kind. Where would they start? What would you say your kind of starting take-home messages would be?
I think starting small and starting simple is always the best idea. So we can even just take a breath and say, do I get enough sleep? And if that's the case, if that's what we need to work on, then creating that as a priority of just simple restorative sleep. And I wasn't sleeping either. I forgot to mention that I had terrible insomnia, which goes up right along with all these other things. So if we can just fix something basic like that, and it might take us 2 or 3 months to just pour into that. And we can even then say, am I being able to spend time in nature? It's one of the most important grounding things in our life. So we can take any small part and create some small habit of self-care. And that, affects everything else. And really, I think just starting there. So it could be sleep, it could be changing the way that we have a relationship with food. It could be, pouring more into the people in our lives, or giving ourselves permission to rest. It could be going out for a walk in nature 3 or 4 times a week, whatever that looks like. And just giving ourselves silence, to me, is one of the most powerful things that we can ever do. You don't have to meditate, but we don't have to listen to music. We don't have to be listening to an audiobook. Just being able to be with what is, and just being there. Like if we're doing the dishes, just doing the dishes. And something simple like that can begin to have enormous healing effects for us.
So interesting. Some good evidence about just 2 hours in nature a week can make a huge difference. It's like, wow.
Yeah. It doesn't take much, and what to me is astounding is the resilience of the body, is the resilience of the mind. I mean, because I basically really didn't take care, in fact, probably, abused my mind and my body for so many years, with not sleeping, not giving myself permission to rest, all of those things. And yet when we do give ourselves permission, when we do start doing any of those small things, how quickly that we can rebound.
Yeah. Next, what else? What would you do next? Where would we go next?
Where would we go next? From starting a small fraction of a practice. If somebody is interested in meditation or mindfulness, then I think it's one of the most important ways that we can move through our lives. And so there are a myriad of apps that are out there now, like you send your patients to YouTube videos. What the evidence behind, and they actually just published a fairly large study, showed that if you can find a group or a teacher with a group, then you can find not just the depth of meditation, because, meditation practice is just a practice, but it actually is how we live our lives, and also have a little bit of peer-to-peer accountability and momentum. Then that's really how people found that they could continue to go deeper into their meditative practices. And most recently, even just, I think it was 15 to 20 minutes it was a mantra-based practice that they did. And it literally gave the same amount of clinical effects as it was escitalopram, and it was escitalopram 40 milligrams was the comparison. And it was a very large trial that was published. So we can have those neurotransmitter changes, and not just that, we have gray matter changes in the brain. We have dopamine changes in the brain. We have cortisol changes in the body, all of those things. And when we can give ourselves the gift of homeostasis, even if for a short period of time, then we can make more intentional decisions. So I would say try out an app. If that's not working for you, look for maybe a group that you can look for.
Yeah, I like that. The community and accountability piece that you talked about before, I think that really does take it to another level. And I think that is interesting because we still have, unfortunately, this stigma or mental health. We want to hide that, the medical legal implications for healthcare workers if they are admitting to mental health illness. I think that is still, unfortunately, still such a big barrier and obstacle to physicians wanting to seek help, that if they understand, hey, we want you to get help, and look at the ideas of what is available to you right now as well. Yeah. So
for sure. And, we didn't make that up either, Sarah. It was handed down to us from our medical societies. I know for a fact that it was actually that I had friends who were physicians who were suffering and would not go to seek help, because then they would have to go report to the board of medicine in Tallahassee, Florida. I think that rule might still be there. I don't know. I know they talked about removing it during COVID, but I don't know that it ever happened. But that kind of not just stigma, but real life consequences of going before the board of medicine because you suffer from anxiety, like that is that stigma.
That's not kind.
It's not kind.
Not kind.
It is such a punishment.
Punishment.
It's such a punishment when it should be rewarded. So I think hopefully we're moving in that right direction, but it's still there. And I think acknowledging it and recognizing it is very, very important, just like you did.
Yeah. Okay. And then I think that from I would like to ask about you had physical ailments, you passed out, your manager took you to the hospital. Like, this is serious health stuff going on. Right?
I know. I literally, because I was
broken.
so well, we're taught we never miss a day of work. Right. And I was like, I don't know, I had to look, I think I was like 32. I had no business having kidney stones. I've never had them since I stopped drinking Diet Coke, but that's what it was, right? I was drinking like Diet Coke all day long and forgetting to hydrate. And guess what? It has consequences. And it isn't something that we can't control. We can control it. We just have to turn towards it. So those were all very real. I had lots of GI issues. I had, chronic daily migraines that required a lot of help for me, but I had to wait, I recognize now, until it was physical to get help. It wasn't, I wouldn't really turn towards, whether it was anxiety, insomnia, or just however we would say, like, not emotionally well, emotionally turbulent, whatever that was. And it's not to say that I can't go to those places now. I mean, I think that would be a folly to say somehow I'm fixed forever. No one is. We're on a constant journey. It's just that, when, just like you noticed too, like when we notice there are some certain red flags, then we can catch it a lot earlier. And it can be a 5-minute bout of anxiety versus a 5-day, sort of like spinning out of control. And so it isn't that those thoughts or those emotions are a problem. It's that we can then be with them in a different way. And the physical pain, I had to wait for the physical pain. Yeah. Because it wasn't validating any mental pain.
Yeah. So for those physicians out there who are battling with the additional physical health pieces that are going on in their lives, what would you say to them? If you were back there, like, who was noticing for you, do you think, Rashmi? Was anybody noticing your migraines, your irritability, was anybody saying, hey, have you noticed that? Any spotters that you can identify?
I think we get really good at hiding all of it, right? Like we get really good at being stoic to the outside. And so what I would say is just taking stock of, is my physical health okay? And if not, what do I need? We actually know the answers to this. It isn't like we have to go and seek the answers. And so, and if it is something simple, then starting it right away. If it's something complex, then getting help, reaching out for help, and giving ourselves permission to heal. And if that means taking time off, then that means taking time off and not creating a story around I'm weak or I'm this or I'm whatever, because I need to take time off because I'm not feeling well. And that is a change in narrative that is not easy to come by, but we can practice it as a skill.
Yeah, I think that's important. The change narrative, I think you've done that beautiful journey for us of showing us the closet meditator, the crisis meditator, and then the permission giving, saying, I don't want to pass out and have my manager take me to the hospital. I kind of know some of the things I would prefer to be doing. I know how to start to prioritize me. And know that I'm going to resist that initially. Like for the longest time, it sounds like you did a little bit of crisis meditation when it got too much. And then you kind of fell back into I don't need to do this every day. I don't need to. And then you're like, hang on a minute. I'm actually going to step into and give permission to myself to do this daily to help my health be sustainable and my mental health be sustainably better and those pieces. So thank you. I think that's really helpful. The people who are still struggling with this is awful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I'm so delighted to have brought you Dr. Schramm. I was excited to have her come in. It's been a few busy weeks for me, and I'm like, you know who I need to talk to? It's going to be so nice because I'm going to feel like I've been able to exhale, drop my shoulders, and just feel somewhat calmer by the end of our conversation. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you for being part of the Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast. If you'd like to learn more or join us to help you get home with today's work done, go to chartingcoach.ca. There you'll find all the information on the premier Lifetime Access Charting Champions program that is helping physicians get home with today's work done, with all the proven tools, support, and community you need to create time for your life outside of medicine. We would love to see you there. Until next time, thanks for listening.